I'm Arman. I'm from Horizen Labs, and today we'll be discussing core of the Open AGI topics, which are like privacy, security, and open source AI. As we move closer to the AGI, these are the three important things that we need to secure. And if we go wrong in any of those three, then it can be very disaster at the end of the whole Open AGI scheme. Uh, yeah. So maybe let's have a round of introductions from our panelists.
Hey everyone, thanks for taking the time out of your busy EthDenver week to join us here today. Jake Salerno, VP of Go-to-Market at Zero Gravity Labs. We built a full stack OS to power AI on chain that comprises of a layer 1 EVM compatible purpose-built blockchain for AI settlement, a decentralized storage layer, decentralized compute marketplace, and then a data availability layer. Those are the 4 chunks, the meat and potatoes, I like to say, that help people build fully on-chain AI.
I think I already talked for 10 minutes, but for those people who joined recently, I'm Salman Avestimehr. I'm professor at USC, directing USC Amazon Center on Trustworthy AI. I'm also co-founding ChainOpera AI, which is a blockchain AI company, and Timely and TensorOpera AI, which are Web2 AI companies. Pleasure to be here.
Nice to meet everyone. My name is Gabriel. I'm a researcher at Gensyn AI. My background's in algorithmic game theory, and we are building the network for machine intelligence, I like to say, and all the primitives we need to make that happen. Things for reproducibility, verification, etc. Thanks for coming today.
Awesome. So the first question for the whole panel would be that open source AI brings a lot of transparency and a lot of community involvement while building those models. But it also brings a lot of privacy risk as well. So like few models can go wrong. There can be vulnerabilities as well. And then there can be privacy leaks from these models as well. So how do you guys think that we can optimize it further so that open source AI would be the next frontier while developing models?
I think looking at the last kind of meta trend that we've seen with OpenClaw, that was a cool example of how quick this could be viral, to say the least. And when you've got open source models, open source repositories, cool frameworks that people can hard fork and then just start building new use cases around, people feel very empowered and you're not having to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to start from scratch. And that's exciting because it simplifies and also speeds up the time to market when you're building new applications or companies per se. So for us, we of course want to embrace what is open source, allow people to build in a very transparent manner, but also add that layer of privacy if it makes sense for the use case or the person that's using it. So you could take an open source type of model, train it, fine tune it, create something that you need or your company needs, and then encrypt it, make sure it's private, and then fine tune it with, let's say, proprietary data, sensitive information that you wouldn't want to have reside in the public domain. Mm-hmm. And we've created some different ways of going about that with the infrastructure that we've built with trusted execution environments, ZK, encrypting elements on storage and compute. But a lot of it stems from that open source genesis where people take it and then they fine tune it. And then once it's where it needs to be, of course, they can encrypt it and put the data that's sensitive into that execution environment and make it very useful for their company or project or use case that they decided to build it for in the first place.
Yeah, maybe I put it in the layer perspective. For example, in the AI, we have the model layer and now the agent layer. Open source can play a role on both. I think for the model layer, essentially open sourcing solves the access and cost problem. For example, people making models open source, everybody can access it, use it without paying the premium price, and you can host it. It won't solve any of the privacy, maybe security, maybe ethics, etc., because you have no clue what was the training pipeline, what data set they used. Right. So it's kind of, if we want to maybe ask the open source to solve those problems, we need to go one step further to know what was the training pipeline, how did they collect the data, who annotated it, how did they put the utility, for example, what was the alignment that they used for training the models. And unfortunately, those are not present in the market today, right? So I think that's a clear gap and potential concern for us. Now, if we go to the agent layer, like for example, with OpenClaw, then it becomes even more tricky because this agent, what is it going to do, right? Is it going to hack your computer, do maybe empty your wallet, etc.? I think that's where once the agent is open source, you can maybe monitor the tooling of it and the logic flow of it. Maybe for individual people or maybe not tech-savvy people is very difficult, and that's where we see actually OpenClaw causing some issues. But I think that's an opportunity for AI models to analyze the workflow and maybe spit out what are the risks involved in that. So I think that's the beauty of building maybe higher layer open source tools like OpenClaw agents. Then we can see actually what are they going to do. Although we don't know what model, like what is the model is going to do, but it becomes less important because it's about the actions that the agent is going to take. So now, I think that's maybe, my answer for the 2 layers, but I pass it to you.
Yeah, I second a lot of that opinion where I might have missed the question. Honestly, I can't hear very well over here. But the open source is necessarily like the remedy for any privacy trust sort of issues. They kind of run parallel. You have this to solve anything you have to solve for that in open source environments, you'd have to solve in the centralized or like closed source environment, or rather maybe you don't need to solve it, but you hope they did, right? I think it's the big difference is in open source, in an open source world in this sort of setting, it gets exposed. It's put on the limelight a lot more and kind of prodded and more rigorously tested. So yeah, at the model level, I think that the problem is pretty fundamental and requires some big changes on the whole pipeline. And like you're saying, as far as like the agentic, like the tool use level, open source really does help in the sense of like, at least all the tools being used, if they are open source, they're being analyzed, they're being audited in some sense by everyone. But yeah, it's not a perfect solution. We see this with like Linux exploits that, people do very long con sort of development cycles. And then eventually 10 years later, turns out it was someone who's been planning on infiltrating the system the whole time. But anyhow, that's short of it.
Thank you. Yeah. So continuing on the model training side of things, right? So when it comes to open source AI, one of the biggest fields I think which will grow further is federated learning, where like each parties have their own data sets and they try to kind of train their own models and then kind of submerge all those models together. But till now, it's only on the research papers. We haven't seen any big models getting trained using federated learning. Like, what do you guys think? What's the future of federated learning and how can it grow much further?
Well, it's crazy to see like the closed source SOTA state-of-the-art models that have kind of trained themselves recently. The level of developer interaction that they've had, historically speaking, has been much higher. It was shocking to hear how quick and how effective the model, specifically Opus 4.6 and the new O Codex, was able to improve itself. And I think with, to your point, Gabriel, like the amount of scrutiny open source faces, that's a great thing, right? A lot of eyes, a lot of attention on training it. I've been indirectly training models for many years by using them. Of course, there is no reward mechanism. I'm still paying $20 or $200 a month to actually train those models and say, yes, answer A is better than answer B. But we've created, and I think this is a common topic on a lot of panels, just incentivized frameworks and economies where the contributor, the crowd here, myself, anyone, is of course rewarded for the contribution that they have to the AI model itself. I heard a crazy stat last year. I'm curious if it's true, if any of you guys know, that only 1% of the data that exists in the world has actually gone into the training of AI. There's so much other data out there that resides on your phones, your computers, that of course is encrypted or private. And in order to really improve AI to get to that AGI sense, I think that we're going to need to be incentivized as the public to contribute more data. But what's in it for me right now? Right? So that's the golden question. I think blockchain aligns those incentives and provides the transfer of value and the rails for that to occur. It's a little bit more on the research side now, but we're moving very quick when it comes to bringing on board people with AI is actually the tooling, right? Low code, no code is fun. All you have to do is text to prompt to earn. Fun things happening in 0G, and I'm sure with Gensyn and OpenOp or ChainOpera too.
Yeah, so actually federated learning is very close to my heart. We started FedML, is the first open source library, maybe some of you know, on federated machine learning. At the same time as Google TensorFlow Federated started that. And it's kind of our journey actually across these companies. It started from there. And your question was, where is it going to be used? It's kind of, that's where, we also struggled to find a product market fit for federated learning. I think there are a couple of scenarios that we already know and is already in production. For example, training small language models in the range of 1 to 3 billion parameters. Those are actually the models built for the phone. And to your point, that's where you need personalized data on the phone for training them. That's the one that about 2 years ago, actually, we built Fox One. That's an open source, a small language model trained via federated learning on Aether decentralized cloud. So done all decentralized on decentralized data. And I think maybe that's the regime for training models that federated learning could become practical. If you're talking about 1 trillion parameter models, right, you cannot even host it on one node. And maybe you don't have even that much data at one node to contribute to training. You can do fine tuning, but not pre-training. So I think that's one regime that we found the product market fit, especially for models on the phone. The second one, actually, you change it to federated inference. Inference is huge workload for it, and that's where you need a lot of compute and a lot of the inference. Maybe I want to do it locally because of the privacy, because I don't want my prompt to leave my phone and be revealed to anybody. Right? So federated inference is actually one scenario that we already have in the production. And people will get the privacy because their prompt stays on their device. You also save cost because you don't need to go across, costly cloud. Beyond that, if we want to go, on federated learning, for example, I'm familiar with Google's work. They have access to the other 90% of the data that you mentioned. They want to use that for building, and that's one of the reasons many people would say maybe Google is going to win the race to building foundation models. The way won't be federated training on the user, instead using user data to understand how they can generate synthetic data which is close to users, and use a lot of that to train the next Gemini. Okay, so that would be a spin-off federated learning that is real for building, let's say, 100 trillion parameter model, the next Gemini. Right? So it's kind of, we have to be creative on how we apply federated learning as a technology to the market. Whether inference, whether simulating the data, whether a small language model. What I think is a very promising technology. So I like it.
Yeah, I agree with that sentiment overall. With so federated learning, I want it to work. I really do. I want it to be something used used widely. I think a big challenge is it's a tool at the end of the day. It's a way of doing something, and it's not a solution to everything. So we need to find the places where it's appropriate, and then it also imposes some hard assumptions on when it's being applied. And we need to figure out what are the regimes, right assumptions, etc. So, for example, do we assume all the models are homogeneous that are being used within the federated learning system? Is the data heterogeneous, etc.? We need to once we pin down the use case and what the needs of that setting, then we can say, is federated learning going to work here or not? And then beyond that, I also do think that there is a certain power to federated learning that maybe isn't being tapped, maybe it is. I know people study it, which is sometimes there's a lot of data that is very private, very personal. And in fact, if we were to combine it for everyone else, it actually kind of poisons each other's data to some degree, where our preferences, for example, might be orthogonal. With federated learning, you're almost like coarsening the granularity of the data, and then you can apply something that's more general. So maybe there's use case like that where you're creative, where like these hard assumptions, the fact that you are in some sense having to average over many things becomes a boon. But I think that's the challenge that it has right now is probably the research direction is being done with very specific assumptions, very specific directions, and then the application wants it to be something broader, something different. And I imagine these things will merge with time, but yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. So maybe let's move a bit towards the privacy side of things as well. So as we are seeing a lot of LLM models going to pick up, let it be Claude or Grok or Gemini, ChatGPT, all of those. A lot of people are using it on a daily basis, like maybe 100 prompts a day, some kind of users as well. And a lot of people are using for it for financial details of like getting financial predictions. They are also using maybe some kind of MCP servers as well. And by doing all these things, they're kind of leaking a lot of private data unexpectedly, even though they don't want to, but they are exposing it. In terms of developers, they are exposing their API keys and all those things as well. And we have seen a lot of implementations of ZKML and TEs based inference and all those things. What do you guys think? What's the future of this privacy narrative around AI agents and LLMs?
Well, I ran a little test myself before I came here. I created a digital me, so I was able to be more productive networking. And I ran it on just like one of my burner laptops that has no sensitive information on it. But I use Opus 4.6. I basically gave it access to the way that I talk on Telegram. And then I gave it access to our public documentation at 0G and a few other aspects, right? Like my HubSpot API key, so we could actually create leads and opportunities when I meet someone. And it took me about an hour, right? We installed a reprompter that we built, so I could say, build me a bot on Telegram, and the reprompter puts it into a beautiful sequence that's very data driven and actionable. And I was plugging in these API keys, for example, right? I got the bot father up. It gave me the bot's key. Same thing with HubSpot. Same thing with my Google Drive. And as I was going through the sequence with Opus, it was like, you should, of course, change those keys now that you've given them to me, because I could do anything I want with them. And it was actually being cognizant of the fact that I exposed a lot of myself to it. And it was recommending the right kind of remedy to that problem. It's like, once you're done here, replace those keys with ones I don't see. And if you're going to open source this tool, make sure to put that in the footnotes. If you're going to give it to your team, make sure they're aware of that too. So it was interesting to experiment. And of course, that's a working and running bot right now. But the next step I want to do is build it in a trusted and encrypted environment like on Zero Gravity, where we have an interface, right, where it could mimic the typical interface that you'd see in a, let's say, closed source SOTA model. But there's just simple drop downs, right? Hyper secure mode, hyper fast mode, open source mode, and just it gives the rational builder an option, and it doesn't make it super complex or technical. There's a lot of verification methods out there. There's a lot of ways to be more secure out there, but are the standard users today going to know how to do that themselves without the AI kind of just having that intuitive process built in? That's what we're building at 0G now, is kind of that launch pad that allows you to build fully private agents, encrypted agents for certain use cases where the front end is just a drop-down option and something that people can use as a new kind of add-on, a bolt-on to the normal experience, and not just try to rip and replace what the hyperscalers are doing, because we know they're not going anywhere. So we'd rather just offer better secure alternatives to be complementary to that.
Yeah, having worked on security privacy, I think for almost a decade now, both a startup and research, I have mixed feeling. Meaning that any of these panels we come together, we all agree. I mean, privacy is a huge issue, especially with your APIs, etc. But then end users never pay for it. Right. So it's kind of everybody is worried about privacy until they have to pay and they say, forget it. I'm going to use whatever, ChatGPT gives me. So it's kind of is a mixed feeling in the sense that the reality of how serious people think it is while talking about it. And I have never seen, become at the level that, society, like let's say individual people, bring it to the daily practice of their life. Right. But the answer to yours, I think the way we spin it, we changed it from maybe talking about privacy to ownership. I think ownership is more important, because if you own something, then it's your responsibility how you deal with it. You can share it with others, you may keep it, etc. So it's kind of we build ChainOpera around the concept of the AI agent or the super agent. You interact with it, your interactions, you are the owner of it, and all interactions stays with you. Now you have a choice. For example, you can keep it that way, or maybe participate in building, maybe giving the feedback, those interactions to be used for making it better. And I think that's the angle that maybe people will understand, because as you own something, there is a responsibility, not only by developers, but also by the people who are using that to figure out, what is the advantage of sharing it and what is not. And depending on the context, as we said, if it is really maybe sensitive financial information, you don't want to share it. But if it is maybe your daily interaction on maybe research with AI agents or maybe news reading, you don't mind sharing those. But I think it's a very personal decision to be made. In terms of the technology that you asked, I think the first step of it is where this AI is happening. For example, if it is happening on a centralized cloud owned by OpenAI, they own it, right? But if it is happening on a decentralized cloud where these instances, you have a control on it, then we bring ownership to the people. Doesn't mean it can't be hacked, right? So there is a security aspect of it, and that's where maybe you want to make it even more secure. Those instances could be trusted environments. right? But as you move to those scenarios, I mean, you have to trade privacy with the cost and performance. And the question is, how do people want to do it? I think as a platform builder, we give options. Then you can decide what you want to do.
Yeah, I think also, well, first of all, like we're gonna have to strap in. There's gonna be a rough like path ahead of us where people have to kind of go through probably the same growing pains we had in the early 2000s up till recently, where like now I tell someone, hey, you should have different passwords for many different things. If I told you that 20 years ago, you think I'm the most annoying guy in the world, right? Now you might still think that, but you know that I'm not the only one saying that at the very least. And I think we're going to have a very similar thing as we figure out how these agents fit into our workflows, our daily routines, etc. Um, and we'll probably have to develop security models around it as well, right? Where we give them they probably should have their own API key, for example, with an expiration. And we give it only for the things that we want it to go do. Maybe we have workflows where it says, hey, I'm about to go do the finance stuff you want me to do. Can you give me an API key for that, like a temporary one? And then you say, sure, this one will last you 24 hours or whatever. I don't know what it's going to look like exactly, but I think there's going to be the two sides of this. One is going to be the right permissions, the right sort of structure, and the right sort of relationships between how humans interact with these things. And B, it's going to be where these things get integrated directly into apps and other things, where there it's going to be the more traditional sort of privacy, security story. And I think it's going to converge on wherever people are comfortable with. Like you mentioned, it's like people probably aren't willing to pay for it, unfortunately. So hopefully that there's the right standards emerge where, you know, when you do have to interact with it and give it private data and so on, the entities that are doing so have the guardrails imposed on them, or they have the, I guess, wherewithal to do it themselves, perhaps. But yeah, I think we're gonna be in the wild west for a while this sort of shakes out and settles and people figure out where they're comfortable with it. Yeah.
Actually, let me add one thing to what you mentioned, Gabriel. I think which is very true. Even on the research side, all of the, let's say, system security research is based on attack defense, right? And we haven't seen the worst of the attacks yet to study them. So it's kind of a wild west. We have to, unfortunately, that's how even research evolves. You cannot predict what can go wrong. We can speculate it. And once we see those real attacks, then I think there is a lot of work that needs to be done. Yeah.
Got it. Thanks, guys. So maybe we can conclude this whole panel with just one insights from you guys that in the next 1 year, what do you think will be the exponential growth factor for maybe open source AI or privacy security in any of those fields, which you think would go mainstream? Like as we see the LLMs have gone mainstream, do you think any of those open AI models, like how the community will basically decide to grow it together? Like what's the path for you that you look for?
Want to survey the audience quick. Who here has used a on-chain trading agent before? Trading, like it holds your wallet, it trades on your behalf. We got 2 people. I think people will start to, and this is a hypothesis, care more about privacy and security once they've connected their wallet and keys to the agent, right? Because either you pay for it proactively or you pay for it another way. You know what I mean? You got to get wrecked to experience it. You got to touch the hot, pot to know that it's hot, right? But fool me once, right? Anyone that's gotten their wallet drained probably owns a hardware wallet. Before I joined Zero G 2 years ago, I worked at Chainlink Labs for about 3 years. And, we really started to become the industry standard once the DeFi and Oracle exploits started happening. People were aware of the problem and we solved that through oracles. And I believe that the security features that we're building and designing for in the future at Zero G perhaps maybe a little ahead of their integration time, their go-to-market strategy. We're defining our ICP as the space continues to evolve, but we need to be ready for when those headlines go mainstream. And I've already coded a bot that looks up every sort of AI FUD hack or whatever, so we can address it proactively with our narrative. But I think we're still very young with the integration and actual use cases. We talk a lot about trading agents, but clearly not a lot of us have been able to use them yet. I'd say next year, we're going to have a lot more hands go up. because those platforms will exist and they'll be simple. And then we're going to have more stories, unfortunately, about, people getting wrecked because the privacy or security wasn't implemented from the get-go. And of course, we're obviously focused on building a lot of that together.
Yeah, definitely. I think AI for crypto and markets is certainly the area where we see both utility, the need for security, privacy as maybe mainstream and maybe first class citizen, because your most sensitive data is exposed to these AI agents. Maybe I add another one, as I mentioned in Timely, we believe human collaboration and how AI can facilitate that. That's also going to be the next exponential growth, because we see maybe I think also more philosophical in the sense that the most maybe world-changing technologies, they started by connecting people. For example, internet, in the ways that you cannot predict. I think AI hasn't reached that stage yet. It hasn't connected us in better ways. And I think it can start getting to the role of maybe a better connector for collaboration. And I think that's where is going to be maybe a everlasting technology, not just solo, participant with you. So that would be my prediction.
I think I'm widely aligned with that last prediction in the sense of, and I think it's been a recurring theme in all the answers we just heard, which is currently we talk about AI, AGI, et cetera, as this vacuous, all encompassing term. I think in the next year, the things that's really going to unlock a lot of specificity. Right? We talked about trading bots specifically for finance, specifically for like connections, specifically for certain things. Once you can pin down what this thing should do, kind of identify the surface that it has to interact with, how it needs to behave, what sorts of tasks it needs to solve, what tools it should use, yada, 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 then you actually start to get some utility. And I think we're going to have a lot of growing pains. A lot of wallets are going to get drained. A lot of these things are going to happen until we start to kind of accept this profoundly, in the sense that, like, if you take Claude off the shelf and have it trade for you, it's not it's not very good at doing this sort of like systems level thinking, or like thinking beyond the one shot task it's trying to solve. So I think in the next year or so, we're going to start seeing a lot of like people coming to grips with this, building things that are very bespoke and tailored. Maybe then you start to generalize. And I think there's going to be another level over that, which is once they do start to actually connect people and connect with one another, we're going to start seeing some really interesting feedback loops and phenomena that arise, and having to then figure out how to deal with that. Because we saw this in the financial markets with high frequency trading, like in 2011. If folks haven't heard about the flash crashes that happened, there's a big one. Basically, we have these little bots doing very naive things that on paper and individually looks fine, but when you connect them, they move faster than anyone else has ever traded before, and they play a game of hot potato with one another, and market prices start to fluctuate, and then they start to pick up, and then next thing you know, they hit the bottom. We'll see some of that as well, I imagine. But yeah, specificity, I think, is going to be the big unlocker for us, with gradual widening.
Got it. Thanks a lot for your wholesome prediction, guys. Looking for a great year ahead next year, and let's see how it works. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.